Hey everybody, welcome back to Submarine History. Today, we're going to have a briefing on the General Board of the U.S. Navy. It'll be a short briefing, but an important one because the General Board had a hand in the development of submarines. We'll also talk a little bit about how the board interacted with the different Navy bureaus, and of course the Office of the Secretary of Navy itself. Two primary references for this briefing: Norman Friedman's book, U.S. Submarines through 1945, An Illustrated Design History, published by the Naval Institute Press, and Planning for War, A History of the General Board of the U.S. Navy, 1900 to 1914, by Commander Joseph Costello. Read the description to this briefing. It has relevant related references and links. Last, but of course not least, thank you to the United States Naval Institute for all they do preserving and promoting world naval history. The work USNI does is invaluable. Consider supporting them with a donation or a membership. If you have any questions or comments regarding this briefing, post them below in the comments section. I also have a Discord for more in-depth discussions. You can find an invitation link on the channel page. We'll start our briefing today with a short discussion on the bureau system of the U.S. Navy. The intent is to give you a little background on things, so as we go along discussing U.S. submarines, you have a better understanding and a little more perspective on the Navy decision-making process. Okay, from the founding of the Department of the Navy in 1798 until 1815, the entirety of the U.S. Navy, things like personnel, procurement, construction, warfighting, that was run directly out of the Secretary of the Navy's office. However, the expansion of the Navy during the War of 1812 made it clear that the Navy Secretary was not equipped to do all the things just mentioned and that the system wasn't sustainable. To address this, in 1815, Congress established a 3-member Board of Naval Commissioners to handle material support matters, things like logistics, supply, construction, with the Secretary of the Navy retaining administrative and operational control over most other aspects of the Navy. This system worked for a while until naval technology began to evolve at a rapid pace, making it difficult for this Board of Naval Commissioners to, keep up and provide the technical expertise that the Navy Secretary needed. This is why, in 1842, Congress eliminated the Board of Naval Commissioners and authorized the creation of the Bureau system to replace the commissioners. Each bureau was able to focus and become subject matter experts in their area of specialization, allowing the Navy Secretary to focus on operations and other big picture stuff. Reporting directly to the Secretary, the bureaus would become tightly controlled fiefdoms, often at times at odds with each other, and eventually the General Board. Because they were looking out for their own interests or just unwilling to budge on issues because they were the, quote, experts and you were infringing on their turf. As an example of this, you could have a situation where the Construction Bureau was designing a ship with certain specifications, and the Ordnance Bureau could be designing guns that required a different ship design altogether. And the two bureaus would be at loggerheads trying to push through what they wanted. Initially, there are 5 bureaus: construction, equipment and repairs, medicine and surgery, ordnance and hydrogeography, provisions and clothing, yards and docks. In 1862, during the Civil War, Congress reorganized the bureau system and expanded it. As reorganized, the bureaus were construction and repair, equipment and recruiting, medicine and surgery, navigation, ordnance, provisions and clothing, engineering, yards and docks. It's a pretty big box, but it probably accurately reflects the influence the bureaus had. And that's how it worked from 1862 to 1900. Well, technically 1898. 1898 and the Spanish-American War. Now, I haven't really read anything on the Spanish-American War since high school, But recently I heard someone make the comment that we only won that war because the Spanish were less prepared than we were. Yeah, that's right. And around the turn of the century, this did not go unnoticed by some key individuals like Captain Henry C. Taylor and Secretary of the Navy John D. Long. There was a growing feeling that the U.S. Navy was reactionary and not focused on war planning for the future. Taylor had been, for a while, and this is like 20 years, pushing for the Navy to invest more in war planning and make it a full-time activity, one that would change and adapt to changing world politics. Taylor started pitching his idea of a general board of Navy experts that would be responsible for war planning to advise the Secretary of the Navy. He was interested in an organization more along the lines of a German-style general staff to the German army, but Secretary Long was like, hey, no way can I get this past Congress. So, in 1900, the board is established in an advisory capacity with no power granted from Congress. Here we are in 1940, and you can see how the U.S. Navy organization is starting to get complex. This is from December 1940. So let's take a simpler look. So what's changed from 1900? Well, in 1915, the position of Chief of Naval Operations is created, ending the last direct control the Secretary of the Navy has over the Navy itself. And you can see here that the bureaus and the General Board still report directly to what we call, SecNav, Secretary of the Navy. Notice, too, on the slide that some of the bureaus have been consolidated and renamed to what we're familiar with from World War II. Notice the Bureau of Ordnance, or BUORD. There's a YouTube channel I've been watching, The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War, with Seth Paradin and retired Navy Captain Bill Tody. In episode 212, they talk about the U.S. torpedo crisis and BUORD's role in that crisis explained very well. It's an excellent channel. I don't watch a lot of submarine-related content on YouTube because it's mostly garbage. But Unauthorized History of the Pacific War, that podcast, it is definitely a bright spot. Okay, now let's take a bit of a closer look at the organization of the General Board itself. We have an executive committee with Admiral of the Navy George Dewey being the very first chairman. Captain, at that time, Henry Clay Taylor, is also a member of the executive committee, and there would have been 4 to 9 additional officers of at least lieutenant commander rank or higher on the committee as well. In addition to the executive committee, the president of the Naval War College was a member as well, as was the chief Bureau of Navigation and the director of Office of Naval Intelligence. I mentioned earlier that SecNav and Congress were hesitant to create, through law, a large staff organization with defined powers. Because of this, the General Board is a kind of informal advisory body to SecNav, without any power backed by federal legislation. Ideally, the board would involve themselves in war planning and make recommendations to SecNav on issues related to naval preparedness. This solves, on paper, the problem of SecNav going to the bureaus for guidance and then getting conflicting guidance from them. And this is a simple work flowchart for the board. It starts with ONI collecting intelligence and providing that intelligence to the General Board for their consideration. Based on that intelligence, the General Board would make future war plans, whatever those plans were. It could be what direction to go with ship design, or who are our possible enemies in the future and how do we plan to fight them. You get the picture. The war plans created by the board would then go to the War College. They would evaluate the board's plan and make comments and return it to the board. From there, the board would go back to ONI for further intel, then modify their plans and resubmit those plans to the War College. This was an annual process that resulted in SecNav getting war plans that he could take to the bureaus for action. And this is how it worked until 1950, when the Navy reorganized and eliminated the General Board altogether. Was the board successful? As often is the case, it was a mixed bag, with the board having some success, but it also had some defeats and setbacks. The problem was that the board would make these war plans and oftentimes get pushback from the bureaus. We'll talk about some of those, as well as issues with some of the bureaus themselves. So that's it for today's briefing. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, post them below or head over to the Submarine History Discord and ask your questions there. Till next time, peace out.